Good morning, learners. Welcome to Lesson 15, Session 1. Today, we're going to continue learning more about area. In fact, we're going to find a faster way to work on area than having to count squares. We're going to explore multiplying to find area. Let's go ahead and read the instructions. You have already learned how to find the area of a rectangle by counting the number of square units that cover the rectangle. Now remember, area, if you've forgotten, it is the space covered in a flat shape. That's right. That's what we used. It's space covered in a flat shape. Okay, so you have already learned how to find the area of a rectangle by counting the number of square units that cover the rectangle. This lesson will help you find the area using multiplication. Use what you know to try to solve the problem below. Okay, let's go ahead and read our problem. Jenny wants to find the area of the rectangle shown. Okay, pause for a minute. Let's look at the rectangle. But some ink spilled on it. Notice that? How can she find the area if she cannot count all of the square units? Remember in our last lesson, we were able to count the squares in order to find the area. But now some ink has covered up some of our squares. How would you find this area? Go ahead and pause the video for a minute and think about what is the area of this rectangle and how did you find it? Okay, welcome back. What did you find? What is the area? How many square units are in this rectangle? If you got 15, you are right. So let's look at how did you get 15? So we can say that the area equals 15 square units. How did you find that out? Now, there's a couple of ways you can do this. First of all, you can visualize. Remember, we've talked about visualize. That means when you see something in your head that may not be here. Now, to visualize this rectangle, I notice that there are 3 squares in the column. And I notice that there's 3 squares in this column and this column. So I can visualize in my head, I can actually see in my head that there are 3 here and there are 3 here. So I could visualize what is going on in this rectangle, even though some of it is covered. So maybe you could just see it in your head. Now it's possible that you could also count. You kind of have to be able to visualize if you're counting. But remember, we were looking on skip counting in the last lesson. So if I take a look here, if there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 here, and I'm going by skip counting, if there's 5 here, I know there's 5 here, and I know there's 5 here. So 5, 10, 15. So I could skip count to find 15. Now, some of you may have started to think about how could I use multiplication? I know you've studied multiplication, and you might have thought to yourself, well, there are 3 rows of 5. And so 3 rows of 5 is the same thing as 3 times 5, and that is 15. We could also look at how many columns are there. Remember, rows are horizontal. Columns are vertical. They go down. So rows go this way, columns go this way. I've always remembered that houses have columns in the front of them. You know, a house has, so if you have a house, sometimes they have a porch and there's columns. These are columns. So like when you walk up to the door, there are these long columns by the door to hold up the porch. That's how I remember columns are up and down. So I did 3 rows of 5, right? 3, 1, 2, 3 rows of 5. You could also do 5. How many columns do we have? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I have 5 columns of 3. So that would be 5 times 3. Oops, there we go, 5 times 3, which is also 15. So you're going to find in this lesson, there's lots of different ways to find area. So let's go ahead and turn the paper over and begin working. Okay, now I'm on page 316. Look back. Explain how you found the area of Jenny's rectangle when you could not see all the squares. What is the area of Jenny's rectangle? Go ahead and pause the video for a minute and tell me how you figured out 15. Remember, you may have used any of my 3, or you might have had a method of your own. Okay, let's work on number 2. Look ahead. When you know the length and width of a rectangle, you do not have to count the square units to find the area. You can multiply instead. Puppy's hitting the tray. Okay, here we go. Hopefully you'll stop wiggling. Jenny's rectangle without the ink spill is an array of squares. Do you remember learning about an array of squares? You used arrays when you were learning about multiplication. We have our rows and we have our columns. Okay, let's start again. Jenny's rectangle without the ink spill is an array of squares that have been pushed together. What 2 multiplication equations can you write to describe this array? So think about the arrays that you learned in multiplication. What are the 2 ways that we could write our multiplication equation? Okay, we have 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right? We have 5 columns of 3. 5 columns of 3, which equals 15. Now remember, they said equation, so we have to have our equal sign. What's the other way we can write this? Remember, I have 3 rows. I have 3 rows of 5. So I could write this as 3 times 5 is 15. We can write it both ways. That's a really cool math property called commutative property. That means I can flip them. I can move them and they still equal 15. Okay, in B, write an equation to multiply the length and the width of the rectangle. Explain how you can use length and width to find the area of a rectangle. Okay, so to write this equation, I'm going to use these words. I'm going to show you how to use these words in our equation. It's going to help you to learn area of a rectangle, and this is an equation you are going to use for the rest of your math life. I even use it as an adult when I'm working in my yard. Okay, so here we go. Let's go. Area is the same thing as the length times the width. Okay, so if I know the length of my rectangle and I know the width of my triangle, I can multiply them together to find my area. So the length is 5, use my multiplication sign, and my width is, take a look, our width is 3. 5 times 3 is 15. Explain how 5 times 3 gives you the same area as counting all the squares. Now remember, multiplication is repeated addition. Let me write that. Multiplication is repeated addition. If you need to, say that. Say it with me. Multiplication is repeated addition. So what that means is, in my rectangle here, I am going 3 plus 3 plus 3 plus 3 plus 3. So let's write that. 3 plus 3 plus 3. How many times do I need to do this? That's right, I need to do it 5 times. So 3 plus 3 plus 3 plus 3 plus 3 is the same thing as 5 groups of 3. And we know that 5 groups of 3 is 15. So 3 plus 3 is 6, plus 3 is 9, plus 3 is 12, plus 3 is 15. It is a lot faster and a lot more efficient to do multiplication than having to add multiple times. Okay, now the reflect. How is finding area of a rectangle like finding the number of items in an array? So think about what you know about finding items in an array and finding area of a rectangle. What's the same about those two? Go ahead and pause your video for a minute and write down, what do you notice is the same about both of those? Then come back and I'll share some ideas. Okay, so now that you're back, I noticed that in area of a rectangle and in number of items in an array, that we are looking for groups of. In both area and in arrays, we are looking for groups of. In rectangles, we might say rows of or columns of, but it is the same idea. It is multiplication. I also noticed the number of square units in a rectangle, right here, the number of units in a in a rectangle, it makes an array. So if I put square units in a rectangle, it looks just like the arrays that we learned in multiplication. I also noticed that I am multiplying columns by rows, which is also what we did in arrays. Okay, so now let's move to 317. 317 is where you are going to begin your practice. Whenever it's green up here, that means it's something that you start to do on your own. So what I'd like for you to do is go ahead and go through both sides, do what you can, and then watch video number 2, and I'll go over the solutions. Okay, good job, good luck.